I would like to welcome everyone to our April webinar series. This is week 2 of our April Blossom and Bloom series. Thank you all for joining us last week. Last week, we had a presentation by our prevention consultant, Karen. And this week, we are having a presentation that will be presented to us by Julia Crevice. I'm going to let you guys know a little bit more about Julia. So, Julia is a fun and outgoing individual. She has her master's degree in public health. She received her degree from Montclair State University. At that university, she played field hockey for the majority of her undergrad and grad experience. During her studies, she worked in health education, where she focused primarily on LGBTQ plus community, AIDS awareness, women's rights, and mental health. She was once a troubled student. She recognized that a compassionate educator made all the difference. And the passion of her professors had inspired her to become a health educator. In this, she will be aiding students in living the best life that they can through prevention. She is known for her creativity, both in the workplace and everyday life. Outside of work, she enjoys video games, working out, and doing nails. And without further ado, I will turn it to Julia.
Thank you so much, Safa, for that intro. I appreciate it. Let me just share my screen here. Let's see. Hello. Okay, can you guys see that? What's happening? Hello?
I think it's frozen, but
Oh.
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Let me make sure I have my sounds shared too. Okay, yeah. Okay, so again, thank you for that intro, Safa. It is spring, finally. Last week, we talked about decluttering the mind, and I like to think of healing the inner child as another way of decluttering the mind. So without further ado, we're going to talk about the inner child and healing the inner child, and what it means to heal your inner child and how it can benefit your mental wellness. So our table of contents here. So first, like I said, we're going to talk about the inner child, what it is and what it means to heal it. And we're going to talk about signs you may need to heal your inner child. We're going to talk about how you actually can heal your inner child, and of course, the benefits of healing it and the benefits to your growth and mental wellness. So inner child, this word is maybe a little bit more well-known in the younger crowd, but maybe the older crowd knows it as well. So does anyone want to kind of talk about what they think the inner child is? You can unmute, or I can't see the chat that well, but you can try. Yeah, I can see it.
Hi, Julia. I think like the inner child is kind of like a reflective look at your past and kind of understanding how it shaped your child version of yourself and how it comes to shape who you are now, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's definitely a great explanation. I would expect no else from our clinicians. Ben pretty much hit the nail right on the head. So it's a psychological idea that refers to the childlike parts of the psyche, the personality, the emotional being, and that continues into adulthood. So it often represents a person's childhood experiences, whether good or bad, and that includes the emotions and the memories that come along with childhood, and it often influences their behavior and thoughts and emotions into adulthood. So it's essentially a representation of yourself at multiple points of your life. So the inner child, as you can think, it probably has some childlike traits. So what are some traits that you think of when you think of children? can't really look at the chat because I think you guys will see it.
Do you want me to read the chat for you?
Yeah,
There
that
you
would be
go.
great, actually.
Okay.
Someone, yeah.
So people are, Ben said curious, Zoe said playful, some other comments that are coming in, playful, joy.
Yeah, definitely. I have a couple of those. So something I said was innocence, right? That's a big one. Spontaneity, creativity, curiosity, and of course vulnerability. That's kind of the big one that creates that inner child, is the fact that children are so emotionally vulnerable, right? So it's kind of connected to that childlike enthusiasm, that curiosity, that creativity that we all experienced as children. And it's the traits inside yourself that reminds you of your little self, that can embody, like I said, both positive and painful experiences of childhood. And like I said before, our younger selves are always inside us. It's each step of the way, right? And so some of those painful experiences may be unresolved trauma, mental wounds, emotional wounds, unmet needs, of course. And like I said, all these aspects carry into adulthood. The mix of all of these things, the mix of these unresolved traumas, the wounds, the unmet needs, and the innocence, the vulnerability, those things can really impact and it can really impact their relationships, their self-esteem, and their well-being as they grow up. So the injured inner child. Children are very, like I said, emotionally vulnerable and impressionable. So when a need or many needs are not met, there's a chronic injury essentially to the inner child, essentially like an emotional scar, right? So unfortunately, they often go unrepaired into adulthood. So most of the time, there's some emotional needs that were not met as a child. Of course, very intense trauma like abuse and things like that can also rupture the inner child. But, I think everyone pretty much has a ruptured inner child these days. So like I said, some emotional needs were not met and they can seem sort of insignificant. But when the pattern continues and continues, it can lead to this chronic injured child. So the first one I have is unvalidated, right? So maybe your parents never allowed you to share your feelings, or when you did, you were told that you were wrong and your feelings were unimportant, or maybe you didn't feel safe sharing your feelings, right? Neglect, of course, is pretty self-explanatory, not having the physical needs that you need met, feeling unsupported. So maybe you were often picked on. This could be by friends or family or bullies, or maybe you were put under too much pressure. Maybe your mother expected you to look a certain way or act a certain way, and no matter what you did, you just could not do it. It was never good enough, right? Lack of autonomy. I think this is a really big one in children. Some people seem to think that children view children as like objects or as like their possession, parents specifically. So maybe you weren't allowed the privacy that you needed, which then made you feel like you didn't deserve autonomy, or maybe you don't even know what that is because of that. Lack of control is a big one as well. When you're a child, things are so confusing, right? So when things are confusing, that lack of control is very scary. So maybe your parents were extremely strict, or maybe you had anxiety and your anxiety was confusing, right? Lack of encouragement is a big one as well. So maybe no one believed in you as a child, so now you don't believe in yourself now. And then inconsistency, like I said, that confusion, things are so confusing, right, when you're a child. So maybe your parents' punishments were very inconsistent. Maybe you never knew exactly what you were doing wrong, or maybe the punishments were always different and they varied in severity, right? or you were constantly moving from one parent's house to another, so that instability is kind of scary, right? And there's many other examples. This is not just it. This is just kind of like the big ones that I found. So essentially, the injured inner child is unresolved trauma from childhood. And when we think of trauma, we often think of like these big experiences like abuse and things like that. But when these littler things, I shouldn't say little, but smaller things happen over and over and over again, it creates this pattern, that is very difficult to deal with as a child. So maybe some of these situations happened to you in childhood, and once you grew up, the effects of these mental injuries were never healed, and it reflects in your adult life, right? So now we have signs of an injured inner child, or signs that your inner child needs healing. Does anyone want to try to get along with that? Maybe you resonate with something I said in the last slide. No, I hope not, but maybe you did.
I'm thinking maybe a substance use disorder or a substance abuse issue.
Yeah, it's definitely a big one with a lot of anything mental health, related. Substance use is always in there for sure. Anyone else? Maybe just like the way you act.
I would say difficulty making relationships, like long-lasting relationships.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good one. Anyone else? Before I go on, I see the chat. Yeah.
I was also thinking about not being able to regulate your emotions.
Yes, that's a really good one. Really, really good one. Yeah, so these are all correct, definitely. So first, I have feeling highly reactive. That's kind of what Vanetta said, like not being able to regulate your emotions. So maybe you're quick to anger, or you feel offended very easily from very little things, or maybe you get really defensive from deep-rooted insecurities from childhood that you may not even be aware of. So you might suddenly feel detached or irritable when someone says something very small. And oftentimes I think it's often seen as an immature reaction, but that makes sense. It's essentially your inner child trying to protect itself, right? So your brain is uncomfortable, the situation is uncomfortable, so you're doing anything to manage that situation. And if your inner child is not healed, you're not really emotionally mature enough to handle something like that. Another big one is overvaluing independence. This is a big one for me personally. I'm a very independent person on my own. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with enjoying your alone time, of course. But it ends up becoming an issue when you're not allowing yourself the help that you need, or you refuse to ask for help. So you might say things either out loud or in your head like, I don't need anyone to help me. I can figure it out on my own. Or if you want something done right, just do it yourself. Or, things like that. You may not say that out loud. Like I said, it could be in your head, but, you might feel that way. So maybe as a child, you kind of felt like you were on your own, right? Maybe your parents were a little bit neglectful or emotionally unavailable. So you're uncomfortable asking for help. You're uncomfortable being vulnerable with other people. So you just opt for independence, right? Rachel said this one, destructive coping behaviors that can include a lot of things. So complicated feelings are very difficult to cope with on your own. So the excessive use of drugs and alcohol is always a risk factor, right? Is always a sign of something deeper. Not always, it can be a sign of something deeper, but it's not only just alcohol and drugs. It can be things like food or shopping or procrastination. And another big one is cheating in relationships, especially. I read that there was, when people have this injured inner child, this chronic cheating ends up happening in their relationships, which we will get into relationships as well. Then, of course, there's poor emotional and mental health, of course. If your inner child is injured, you're not a full person, your mental health is going to take a toll. So, things like depression, lack of motivation, avoidance, seclusion, even like low or overly high libido, which is sex drive, difficulty sleeping. Oh, why is it going? Sorry, guys. Difficulty sleeping, weight gain, increased anxiety. And this is like specifically in specific areas of life, you know, maybe certain things are triggering an insecurity from childhood, right? And I think Armando said this one, repeating relationship patterns. I think he said it as difficulty keeping relationships, which is definitely a part of this, right? So I think it's most obvious with, romantic relationships, but one that is often overlooked is your relationship with your own child. It's a big one with like a injured inner child. So, you know, you might have attachment wounds from your childhood, and they often unconsciously create this unhealthy attachment style in adult. Oh my God, sorry guys. So they might create these unhealthy attachment styles, right, in adulthood. So this is essentially repeating the trauma you experienced in your childhood, right? So maybe you had avoidant parents, so then you're avoidant during conflict, or even when your partner is being vulnerable, you're very avoidant because you're not used to that. You're not comfortable with vulnerability, right? So maybe even being dismissive to your partner's needs or dismissive to your own needs, things like that. Gaslighting is a big one. So you might gaslight yourself into thinking that there are things wrong in the relationship when there isn't, or vice versa. And then, of course, being anxious or fearful in the relationship. So you're putting someone else's needs above your own. And I think a really, really big one is a deep, deep fear of abandonment or rejection. And these are all honestly sort of they're like responses to this chronic stress that keeps going on in your life, right? That continues into adulthood. So once you have these responses that you kind of come up with when you're a child, they kind of just grow into adulthood if you don't manage them. So now we're going to talk about how to actually heal the inner child. I do want to say I'm not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. So, you know, this is all just things that I've researched on. So when you work on healing the inner child in therapy, it's often called inner child work. And like I said before, intense injuries or situations from childhood, such as like sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, or hostile households, should definitely seek professional help through therapy. But you know, less intense childhood experiences can also benefit from inner child work and therapy. So a lot of these are the types of therapies that kind of work with inner child work. So trauma therapy, of course, you know, if you have trauma from childhood. Family therapy, right? Again, a lot of times inner child wounds come from parents, so that can definitely help. Other intense forms of therapy and common talk therapy too. So essentially your therapist can help you acknowledge what needs were unmet when you were a child, and they can kind of work you through solutions to these internalized problems, right? And that can be very emotionally difficult and emotionally taxing, because hard memories that you may not even remember can kind of resurface, and it can be difficult to allow yourself to remember those things, to allow yourself to feel those feelings that you felt, but the benefits will aid you in life in many ways, and that's what we'll get into next. So here are some kind of everyday practices you can do to heal the inner child. So writing letters, that's a very common one in therapy. I've heard a lot of people that go to therapy have their therapist tell them to do this. So you can write a letter to your younger self, or you can write a letter to the people that hurt you when you were younger. And even if you don't send it, it's obviously not a good idea to send a letter like that to someone who was abusive or hurt you, right? But even if you don't send it, it kind of just allows your emotions to flow on the page. It allows you to release all these emotions. And honestly, you might find yourself collecting your thoughts better when you write it, right? So next is creating a timeline of events. This is also a tough one, especially with tumultuous childhoods. So you can kind of create this timeline of events that, like big events that occurred in childhood. So it allows you to kind of acknowledge when certain behaviors started, and maybe if they correspond to certain events, right? So for example, you know, when I was 8 years old, mom and dad got a divorce. When I was 10, dad got remarried. When I was 11, mom got really sick. When I was 15, I started drinking alcohol excessively, things like that. And you can kind of piece it together like a math problem, right? Meditation, of course, is always good for any sort of mental health issues. So kind of it just allows mindfulness and deep thinking. And again, it can allow these memories to come back up. Or it can kind of allow you to separate yourself from those memories as well. And then this one's my favorite, and I think the easiest one, and the most fun. And that's indulging in things that you enjoyed when you were a child, right? So allowing yourself to enjoy these childlike things. I see this a lot on the internet these days with people in their 20s, with stuffed animals and video games and movies and, toys even. A lot of people my age, I'm 25, like collect toys that are stereotypically for children, right? So children are very highly emotional, and because of that, that's because their brains are not fully developed. So a lot of these childlike activities or things are labeled for children because they're comforting and they're enriching. But adults can also allow themselves to have that comfort, allow themselves to have that enrichment, right? So what are some of your guys's childhood indulgences? I have mine up here. You can see my stuffies in the bottom right. That's my room with all my little stuffed animals there, and I will have stuffed animals till the day I die. I will never not have them. So anyone want to share?
Yeah, I was gonna say I also collect Squishmallows. I have a bunch on my couch. This is like
The
my
best.
I don't even
so
know if you
squishy.
guys
They're
can
so
see.
comforting.
It's Oogie
Big
Boogie, but my little Oogie Boogie.
Love that.
But these guys, and then I specifically bought my Nintendo Switch just to play games that I grew up playing as a child because
Totally.
Xbox doesn't have them. So I would say that's what I do, and I love coloring. So
Yeah, I put the coloring there for you. I put the Pokemon there for Pat and for me. So, anyone else?
I like coloring.
Say it again.
I like coloring a lot. I do have the adult coloring books, and I can spend hours just coloring. I didn't think it was childlike behavior.
I don't think it is either, but often, things like this are becoming more normal because people are kind of experiencing like, wow, this is like actually very therapeutic. Like, let's bring this back,
Yeah.
I've like never seen my parents color, you know what I mean? Anyone else want to share one?
I was gonna say that when I was younger, I would see like a lot of videos of like concerts and stuff like that. And now that I'm older and I have the money to go to concerts, because when I was younger, I didn't have the money for concerts. Now I'm like going to like a lot of concerts. Like I literally in 2 months I have 2 concerts back to back. So it's kind of like the money is slowing down. So I gotta be careful. But overall, like you gotta like indulge in what you love. Like you said, to hear that inner child.
Exactly, yeah. That's an interesting point, Armando. I actually just went to a concert this weekend, but, these things that you felt like you couldn't do as a child, now you can allow yourself to. That is also like a way to heal your inner child. Okay. So now we're going to watch this short video about some childhood keepsakes. Let me know if you guys can hear it. Can you hear it? Me neither, so that's interesting. Hold on. I just tested this and it was perfect. Hold on, guys. Maybe I can do something over here. Let me see. Share sound. Does anyone know what I can do to fix this?
Try doing share sound.
We can hear it now.
more
It's
time.
just low now. So if you
I
turn
know,
it up,
let me see if I can turn it up on the, it's up all the way, hold on, let me see if I can turn it up on my screen over here. Let's see.
So in the meantime, in the chat, Whitney said, I love playing my DS and listening to playlists with music from my childhood. I actually like to do that too.
Me too.
The music part, not the DS, because I don't have that much.
Oh, I love my DS, for sure.
Jennifer says, I like to treat myself and sneak out with my sister and go on food crawls.
That is so funny. Okay, let me try this, see if it helps. So video. Okay. Okay.
Miss Puppy Luppy.
What?
Yeah. We can hear it now.
It reminds me of being young and full of confidence.
It feels relaxing and comfortable, known, like home.
I have had this bear all my life. From the moment I was born, it was put in the bassinet with me.
It kind of brings home to you.
Ready?
Ready? Yep. Oh.
This is so embarrassing.
Oh my god!
Oh my god! They kind of look the same.
I'm very embarrassed showing this right now. Like I can barely like look at anybody.
They both look really old.
Yes.
So cute. Look, they're friends. Just like us.
There are like small holes in all the edges because I would just like rub it. Like I just rub the silky.
As I used to cry into his paws. Actually, some like the thread came off of his paws.
I know, look at Peaches. Like she's missing an eyeball. Poor baby.
Aw,
She's missing her nose.
Our dog got a hold of this and ripped it up the back, and the stuffing came out, and she had to fix it, so there's a big seam.
I remember asking my mom why some of her fur is gone, and she told me it's because as a child I used to like bite and rip it off.
I'm just was really happy and proud that I could pass this along to my daughter. It's kind of why I held on to it for as long as I did.
The sentimentalness and also just like the softness of the fur and the look of it, like you can't find anything like this.
I'm an adult. I like live my life. I live in my own apartment, pay my own bills. So when I have it, I'm like, oh, there was a time when I didn't, and I was, you know, this was my little baby.
So parents, don't throw away your kids' toys.
Don't do it.
They will thank you for it later.
My mother washed Puppy Luppy, and his fur.
Mine too. Mine
was
changed.
never the same, and I never forgave her. I never will forgive
Me
you,
too.
Mommy.
Okay, so what did you guys notice about some of the things they said about their keepsakes, or and maybe some like motions they were doing?
I thought it was really interesting. A lot of them were talking about the fact that they were kind of embarrassed because they didn't think anyone else did that. And like, I remember when I was growing up, I had like met someone that still slept with their baby blanket, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not so weird, you know what I mean? So I think that was like one of the things that I picked up, was that people just felt uncomfortable even though it's normal.
Right.
So I thought, even though they were kind of embarrassed and uncomfortable, they were extremely happy. Like everyone has a giant smile on their face when they're talking about it, and just, you know, reminiscing about when they got it and, you know, what they did with it.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I was just gonna say that it's like they went back to being children again. Like the memories, they all came back. And you know, and some of them were not such happy memories because they were like, "Oh, this is when I was crying." That's a great. I really like that video.
Yeah, definitely. I love that video too. It's like so fun to watch, right? So, I noticed that too, Zoe. I was gonna say the one girl said that she would cry into his paws, like her Stuffy's paws, right? So maybe like, if you have a tumultuous childhood, you always found, you know, some comfort in Stuffies or things like that. And then another one I noticed too, the girl with the green blanket, she said, oh, there's holes in it because I used to rub it when I was a kid. And then I noticed that when her partner was talking, she was rubbing the blanket. She didn't even notice that she was rubbing the blanket. So that's something that she used to do in childhood. You know, it really kind of shows how much these things really carry on. And lastly, you know, this guy here with his crazy hair, he said that he has bills to pay, he's an adult, he lives on his own, but when he looks at his stuffed animal, you know, it reminds him of you know, days when he didn't have to worry about things like that. Right. That's a fun one.
Oh my God.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the benefits of healing the inner child. So there are more than just these four, but these are the main four that I kind of read about and picked out, right? So understanding your pain, right? So using inner child work and therapy to kind of lay out that timeline of your life, it can kind of help you identify what experiences may have caused these issues in your life, and it's the first step to the healing process, right? Is understanding like where this pain is coming from and why I'm feeling it. And then after that, of course, you can kind of go into discovering what boundaries you might need, right? So once you understand, okay, this pain came from this situation, you kind of understand what is like a trigger, and you can set some boundaries with the people in your life that are still in your life. Because your younger self didn't maybe have those boundaries, you can now stick up for yourself and set them now. And then wholeness, right? So trauma in general kind of causes the mind to fragment into a bunch of different places, right? So, and that's especially when you're young. So when you stay fragmented into adulthood, that childlike fragments are all over the place. Once you heal that inner child, it sort of unites your younger self with your present self, and that can give you a sense of wholeness. And then last but not least is a big one as well, is identifying patterns, right? So the process of inner child work can give you the tools to recognize these patterns and maybe the confidence to recognize these patterns and their causes, not only in your relationships, but maybe in yourself. Maybe you can, not only do you see, okay, I tend to go for this type of person that is not good for me. Not only that, but you can kind of say, I tend to react this way when someone says something about this, so that can kind of allow you to avoid future unhealthy behaviors. It can help you to avoid other triggers. It can help you to avoid relationships that, are not good for you. And last but certainly not least, this is personally for me the most important part of healing your inner child, is breaking the cycle of trauma, right? So here we have our little trauma circle. We're going to start with adults with trauma, right? So those adults in the green with trauma, that is, let's say their trauma is that injured inner child, right? And that often comes from their parents. So they grow up feeling invalidated, neglected, unsupported, things like that. And then they grow up and have children. So they become parents, right, with an injured inner child. So then these symptoms of that injured inner child, that highly reactive, emotional immaturity, avoidance, or smothering attachment styles, right? That then will go into their children, right? So they will have children with those kind of signs or symptoms. And these symptoms injure that child, right? So then because the parent has a injured inner child, then that child will have an injured inner child, right? And they might grow up into an adult and continue the cycle, right? So the way that you can address something like this is by breaking the cycle, right? It really can be broken in any of these spots, but I would say ideally you want to break it right there when you have trauma as an adult, right? So when you break the cycle as an adult, right, you realize, okay, I have this trauma, I have this injured inner child. I don't want to be like my parents. I don't want to be like my abuser and injure another person. So you get help and you address your trauma, you heal that inner trauma, and it can kind of help heal the future generations with an upstream approach, which is basically prevention, right? You're preventing anyone from getting an injured inner child by fixing yours, right? Does that make sense? And then, of course, last but not least, ironically, embracing your inner child can help you become an emotionally mature adult. So once we heal this inner child, we begin to gain that creativity back. We gain that safety and that security that our younger selves needed. And this allows your positive traits to shine, right? So you can unlock your natural talents or older talents that you forgot you had. You might become more curious, you might become more creative. And of course, it increases your capacity for love for both others and yourself, right? And not allowing your inner child to heal can bring out negative things and immature aspects such as substance use, overworking, racism, sexism, and other forms of hate, right? When you're injured, you see injuries in other people, right? And you find injuries in other people, right? So I like to leave off by saying, you know, children don't hate anything until they're told to, right? So when you unite that child within you to your current self, you have less capacity for hate and more capacity for love. And that's it. Those are my references. And yeah, that's it. Any comments, questions, suggestions? How do I stop sharing this? Okay.
I like to say something. Julia, where are you? I don't see you. Oh, there you are. I like to say that I really like the presentation because there's a saying in Spanish. I don't know if there isn't one in English. It's hurt people hurt, right? And love people that are loved are able and capable of loving. And I never heard of the inner child. I think I'm a child still. Like I'm a lot older, but you know, I still like I'm a child, and I choose to live that way. And I remember somebody saying, this woman, a friend of mine, who has had a child, and she has a lot of issues with her body. She used to always complain about her belly. You know, she always had issues with her belly, and her 3-year-old daughter started like feeling the same way. She said, "Oh, I hate my belly." You know, it's because she was not healed herself, right? I guess like when she was younger, she always felt less than, and you know, and that goes into the children, you know. And I learned that long ago, and I try my best to raise my daughter differently, right? And I did. Definitely. But I really appreciate the presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very common thing, I think, in womanhood, not only in womanhood, but you know, it's big in womanhood where mothers with essentially eating disorders. I mean, if anyone, the youngins know about the almond mom, it's essentially a mom with an eating disorder who shames their daughter for eating the way they want, right? So I know plenty of people like that. I mean, thank God my mother never said anything about the way I looked, but you know, I have cousins who their mom's like, you need to stop eating. Like, you are obsessed with food. Like, you need to stop eating, you know? And so my cousins are growing up with eating disorders, severe eating disorders, because their mom has an eating disorder, and it just trickles down, right? So when you break that, you know, you may have that insecurity about your belly or whatever, but you never want to talk about it around your child, because then your child will pick up on it, right? So breaking that cycle is really, you know, I see things a lot on the internet. It's like, this cycle stops here. I will never yell at someone. I will never curse at someone ever, because I could not handle being yelled at, you know what I mean? And why would anyone else want to get yelled at? So I'm never going to yell. So you break that cycle right where it is. That's it for me. If anyone else has something to say. Jennifer, is your hand raised, or are you just stretching?
Oh, I was stretching, but no, this was great. I really did like
Thank
this.
you.
Go back and look at it on the canvas.
Yeah, I can send it to you if you want. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, sorry, I was just real quick. I really enjoyed it. I think it's like a topic that I never thought about. Like, it's something like when you brought it up, I was like, I never even thought about this before. But especially for people that, you know, might be going through like a crisis, or, you know, even for relating to children and understanding what they're going through and why they're acting the way that they are. I think this is really insightful, and great job.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
So on that note, I'm just going to share a screen with the feedback information, so you guys can go ahead and leave Julia some feedback.
All right. Thank you for sharing your screen, Shakara. And thank you so much, Julia. That presentation was beyond excellent. I think almost everyone can resonate with this topic, because to understand certain things maybe, that happened in our childhood, and maybe, why our family and our parents are the way that they are, it's a little bit more helpful to, make those connections in healing yourself as well. Because, like you mentioned in your presentation, maybe someone's inner child was never healed, so that now there are things that are emerging that can impact your relationship with them because they had something and maybe their parents had something, and it just goes down the line. So I truly, truly enjoyed this presentation. I left 2 links in the chat for everyone. And as in addition, there is the link on the screen. So if you guys enjoyed the presentation and want to keep watching more presentations of this series and for the series to come, please do us a favor. Please follow us. Number 1, follow us on our social media. It is NJ4S Union, and you can send us an email at nj4sunion@preventionlinks.org. In addition, you can send us any questions or any suggestions regarding programming. Nonetheless, we have a presentation for next week. It will be available in the link in the chat via YouTube, and that will be presented by one of our own, Benjamin Monk. He's one of our clinicians, and that will be for the 15th. It will be available on YouTube. If anyone has any questions or need, any walkthroughs on it, being able to access the webinars, you can definitely send us an email. And if anyone has any questions in addition, send us an email. Please reach out. Please follow us on social media, and please join us for the remainder of the April series for Blossom and Bloom. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a wonderful day.